Shalom, Aleichem, peace be upon you, and welcome back to the broadcast. I'm Shawn. Today we are looking at this week's Torah portion, Vayechi. Give me a minute to give you the portion summary from torahportions.org, which says, the last reading from the book of Genesis, Vayechi, which means, and he lived. The title comes from the first verse of the reading, which says, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. In this Torah portion, Jacob prepares for his death by securing a double portion of inheritance for Joseph, and then blessing each of his sons with a prophetic blessing. The book of Genesis ends with the death of Jacob, followed shortly by the death of Joseph, and a promise of redemption from Egypt. So today we're looking at Genesis 47, verse 28, through the end of Genesis, which would be chapter 50, verse 26. Kind of a short outline here. We have the days of Jacob. Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. Jacob's last words to his sons. Jacob's death and burial. Joseph forgives his brothers. And then we have Joseph's last day and death. Something that jumps out to me from this portion that I think will jump out to all of you is the concept that your actions matter. And as we're going to see, as Jacob's dealing out these blessings, they're prophetic, and the behavior of each one of these sons comes through, reminding us that there's consequences. Sometimes for the actions that we do, and sometimes these consequences will follow not just us, but generations, our children, our children's children. What we're doing right now is we're either going to leave a legacy of blessing behind or curse. And your actions and the things you do have eternal consequences. And I feel like all of that comes through with Jacob's words to his sons. So with that thought in mind, let's have a look at this week's Parsha and see if God's Word will say something to us this morning. I'm reading from the Hallelujah Scriptures, starting with Genesis 47, verse 28. Let's begin. And Yaakov lived in the land of Mitzrayim 17 years. So the length of Yaakov's life was 147 years. And the time for Yisrael to die drew near. And he called his son Yosef, and he said to him, Now I have found favor in your eyes. Please put your hand under my thigh, and show kindness and truth to me. Please do not bury me in Mitzrayim, that is to say, Egypt. But I shall lie with my fathers, and you shall take me up out of Mitzrayim, and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I do as you have said. And he said, Swear to me. And he swore to him. And Yisrael bowed himself on the head of the bed. And after these events it came to be that it was said to Joseph, See, your father is sick. And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Yaakov was told, See, your son Joseph is coming to you. And Yisrael strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. And Yaakov said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, See, I am making you bear fruit, and you shall increase you, and make of you an assembly of peoples, and give this land to your seed after you as an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Mitzrayim, before I came to you in Mitzrayim, are mine. As Reuben and Shimeon, they are mine. Your offspring, whom you shall bring forth after them, are yours, and let them be called by the name of their brothers in your inheritance. And I, when I came from Padam, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, And when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is in Bethlehem. And Yisrael saw Joseph's sons, and he said, Who are these? And Joseph said to his father, They are my sons who Elohim has given me in this place. He said, Please bring them to me, and let me bless them. And the eyes of Yisrael were dim with age, and he was unable to see, and he drew them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Yisrael said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, but see, Elohim has also shown me your seed. So please note, Jacob's making the point, I thought you were dead. I thought I would never see you again. And Elohim is just so good, so kind to me, that in my last days, not only am I seeing your face again, but I get to see your sons, whom to me, as he said previously, are no different than my son's Reuben. Right? My son Reuben, and he mentioned another son there. Meaning that the grandchildren are no different. They're still children. They're still descendants. And Jacob is feeling extremely blessed by this. So Joseph brought them from between his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Yisrael's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Yisrael's right hand. And he brought them near to him. So please note, Joseph's bringing the two sons to Jacob, and he's bringing them in order of their age. Remember, going all the way back to Jacob and Esau, right? The blessing goes to the eldest. But sometimes God has a different plan, as we're going to see with this situation as well. And Yisrael stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, consciously directing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, and he said, Elohim, before whom my fathers, Abraham and Yitzchak, walked, the Elohim who has fed me all my life long to this day, the messenger who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the youths, and let my name be called upon them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and let them increase to a multitude in the midst of the earth. Please note, you might have caught during part of Jacob's prayer, he says the messenger. That would be translated as angel in most English translations, who has redeemed me from all evil. Do angels redeem, by the way? I believe what Jacob is referring to is that wrestling match he had with God. And that is what he's talking about, which just continues to lend credibility, I believe, to my belief, which is that it was not an angelic being, but God. Or at least the presence of God was in that situation, because Jacob even makes the statement, right? I've seen God face to face, and, these sort of things. Continuing on, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it was evil in his eyes, and he took hold of his father's hand and removed it from the head of Ephraim to the head of Manasseh. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also becomes a people, and he also is great, and yet his younger brother is greater than he, and his seed is to become the completeness of nations. Please note, I don't have time to talk about it on this morning's podcast because it would require a lot more in-depth research and study, but there is the belief that Ephraim is what would become like the Gentile children of God. And I think it's interesting that it says, and his seed is to become the completeness of nations. Just something to think about. Again, it would require a real full study. Verse 20, And he blessed him in that day, saying, In you Yisrael shall bless, saying, Elohim make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. And Yisrael said to Joseph, See, I am dying. But Elohim shall be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. Chapter 49. And Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together, so that I declare to you what is to befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Yaakov, and listen to Yisrael your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my power, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency and exaltation, and the excellency of power. Please note, he's getting ready to do these prophetic blessings over his sons. Remember, what's supposed to happen is the firstborn really receives the large portion of the blessing, right? And if you remember, Jacob's about this, and this is Jacob. When Jacob was a young man, him and his brother struck a deal, and Esau, who despised his blessing, would rather have the passions of the world, sold his blessing to his brother for a bowl of soup, right? Despising his blessing. Wanted pleasure instead of God. Your actions have severe consequences, as Reuben is about to find out, who also, maybe not knowingly, but nevertheless, kind of gave up what should have been rightfully his to indulge his passions. Here's Jacob's words to him. Verse 4, Unstable as the waters, you do not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, and then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So please note, if you remember, Reuben slept with one of Jacob's wives. Grievous. And look at the consequences. He's not going to excel. He's going to be unstable in his ways because he defiled his father's bed. Continuing on, verse 5, Shimeon and Levi are brothers. Their weapons are implements of violence. Let my being not enter their council, let my esteem not be united to their assembly, because they slew a man in their displeasure, and they lamed an ox in pleasure. Cursed be their displeasure, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I divide them in Yaakov and scatter them in Yisrael. Please note, I don't know about all of you, but if I'm standing there as one of the sons and Jacob's on this prophetic utterance, and these are the things being prophesied about us, if I'm the next sons in line, I might be a little nervous because the prophecy for the first three was kind of brutal there. Continuing on. You, Yehuda, your brothers praise you. Your hand is on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children bow down before you. Yehuda is a lion's cub. From the prey you have gone up, my son. He bowed down and crouched like a lion, and like a lion, who rouses him? The scepter shall not turn aside from Yehuda, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him is the obedience of people, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey colt to the choice wine, and washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Please note, that's quite the prophetic blessing, prophetic utterance about Judah, for whom the Jews come from, but most importantly, from whom Shiloh will come from, right? Messiah. Zebulun, verse 13, dwells in the sea of Shore. He is a haven for ships, and his border is in the Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between two burdens. And he saw that a resting place was good, and that a land was pleasant, and he inclined his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a subject to slave labor. Dan rightly rules his people as one of the tribes of Yisrael. Dan is a serpent by the way, an adder by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its riders fall backwards. I have waited for your deliverance, O Yehovah. Please note, that's an interesting phrase. I don't really have anything to say, but he talks about Dan, and then just says this prayer to God. Jacob is clearly completely possessed by the Spirit of God right now, as he's doing these prophetic utterances. In verse 18, I have waited for your deliverance, O Yehovah. Then he continues on. Gad, a raiding band raids him, but he raids its heels. Bread from Asher, rich, and he gives delicacies of sovereign. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He gives words of elegance. Yosef is an offshoot of a fruit-bearing tree, an offshoot of fruit-bearing tree by a foundation. His branches run all over a wall. And the archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and his arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty one of Yaakov. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. From the El of your fathers who helps you, by the El Shaddai who blessed you, with the barakot, that is to say, blessing of the Shemayim above, the barakot of the deep that lies beneath, and the barakot of the breast and of the womb. The barakot of your father have excelled, the barakot of my ancestors, up to the limit of the everlasting hills. They are on the head of Yosef, and on the crown of the head of him who was separated from his brothers. Benjamin is a wolf that tears in the morning and eats prey, and at night divides the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them, and he blessed each one according to his own blessing. And he commanded them and said, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, and in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Yitzchak and Rivkah his wife, and there I buried Leah. The field I purchased, and the cave which is in it, from the sons of Heth. And when Yaakov ended commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. And that's how chapter 49 ends. So Jacob, that's where he passes, right there, after giving this wild prophetic blessing over his sons. Of course, Judah and Joseph received the long blessings. Everybody else kind of receives one-liners or curses, really, which I find pretty interesting. Benjamin is going to be a wolf that tears in the morning and eats prey, and at night divides the spoil. That's interesting, isn't it? Whenever I read that, I think of the Apostle Paul when he is persecuting the church. The Apostle Paul was a Benjamite. All right, one more short chapter left, chapter 50. Open up your hearts. Let's see what it says. And Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Yisrael. And 40 days were completed for him, and he completed the days of embalming, and the Mizrites wept for him 70 days. Please note, I just have to point out how just wild this is. Right now, Joseph's like the second most powerful person in Egypt. The Egyptians themselves are weeping for Jacob for 70 days. But it won't be long until they have forgotten about Joseph and how he saved their nation from great famine. And they have enslaved the Hebrews. Let's continue on. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, See, I am dying. Bury me in a grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. And now please let me go up and bury my father and return. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, and the elders of the house, and all the elders of the land of Mitzrayim. In the house of Joseph, and his brothers, and his father's house, only their little ones, and their flocks, and their herds, they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan. And they lamented there with great and very heavy lamentation. And he observed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land and the Canaanites saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning for the Mitzrayites. That is why its name is called Avel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Jordan. And his sons did to him as he had commanded them, for his sons brought him to the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of a field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial site. And after he was buried his father, Joseph returned to Mitzrayim, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, What if Joseph hates us and pays us back for all the evil which we did to him? So please note, the brothers are a little nervous now. They're thinking, what if all this was just an act out of respect for our father Jacob? What if now that Jacob is gone, our father Yisrael is gone, Joseph is going to avenge. Joseph is going to pay back as a person in great authority over us, as Joseph dreamed, remember, how they would bow down to him? What if now he pays us back? This is their fear. Continuing on. And they sent word to Joseph, saying, Before your father died, he commanded, saying, This is what you are to say, Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. So please note, they send word to Joseph, a lie. They're like, hey, just so you know, before father died, he told you have to forgive us. These guys are swindlers. And his brother also went and fell down before his face, and they said, See, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, Do not fear, for I am in the place of Elohim. Please note, we're almost done, by the way, please note, but Joseph's integrity is the highest of highs. He's like, how am I to pronounce judgment over you guys? Am I God? The implication there is Joseph shows mercy because he is a godly man, and he is like a Christ figure, a Messiah, a messianic figure, foreshadow, if you will, showing grace, mercy, and forgiveness where it's not deserved. But also, that's, acknowledging that at the end of the day, it's God's job to deal with them. And you intended evil against me, but Elohim intended it for good, in order to do it as it is this day, to keep a great many people alive. So Joseph's saying, hey, and what you meant for evil, God meant for good. God had ordained this whole outcome for one reason, to keep a great many people alive, which is why I ended up in Egypt. Verse 21, And now do not fear, I provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them, and Joseph dwelt in Mitzrayim, and he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. And the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. So please know, Joseph received the greatest of blessings, to live long enough to see to the third generation. Not just his son's sons, but his son's sons' sons. Blessed. Blessed among men. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am dying, but Elohim shall certainly visit you and bring you out of this land, of which he swore to Abraham, to Yitzchak and Yaakov. And Joseph made the children of Israel swear, saying, Elohim shall certainly visit you, and you shall bring my bones up from here. And Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Mitzrayim. And that is how the portion ends, but it ends with Joseph giving a prophetic utterance also, which is that one of these days you're going to come up out of Egypt, and when you do, you take my bones with you. And that'll become important as we move into our Exodus story starting next week. Hey, I pray that you have been blessed by this podcast. I've given you some things to think about. Every morning that I get to get behind this microphone and do this, it is a privilege and a blessing, and I'm just so grateful for all of you who listen, and grateful for just having this opportunity to really just share my devotion with you. That's really what I'm doing here. This is just what I would do with my own devotion, and I get to share it with all of you, and I'm very grateful. Please pray for me, but above all, please pray for the podcast. It's in a really weird spot right now, and I'm praying for God's blessing to be upon it, but I'm also praying that God's will just be done. And so I ask that you would join me in that prayer as well. Thank you for listening. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless.